Hello and welcome. This is News18 Global and you're watching it with me, Grihatul Siddiqui. Now, we begin the day's proceedings with all the action from Sydney in Australia as Prime Minister Narendra Modi becomes the only one of the Quad nations leaders to continue with his Australian visit plans after United States of American President Joe Biden pulled out last week to return to Washington to focus on debt limit talks. And also, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also later cancelled his Australian trip. Now, after the Indian Prime Minister touched down Sydney last evening, he was greeted by the Indian diaspora at the airport with banners, portraits and also Indian melodies. The Prime Minister also attended a business roundtable with the Australian CEOs. And to further welcome the Indian Prime Minister to Australia, a grand program has been organised with more than 500 performers from 25 different groups, putting up a grand show at the Kudos Banks Arena in Sydney. Prime Minister Modi and his Australian counterpart, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, are also to have bilateral talks tomorrow over trade, people-to-people exchange and closer bilateral defence and security ties, even as China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region grows.
Well, the preparations are on in full swing. Let me just tell you, I've made my way into the Kudos Bank Arena, but I'm going to walk across and take you. And this is beautiful Ganesha that's been set up, traditional Hindu and Indian style, that anything that starts for an auspicious beginning, there will be Ganesha. They have set it up beautifully with flowers, decorated it, the lamps are there, the oil will be put. I must also tell you that diaspora is coming from Perth, come from Brisbane, from Melbourne, and Adelaide. They're coming in buses, they're chartering planes, calling it Modi Airways, and then they're coming in, they'll all be walking in. But there is heavy security. And each of the groups of performers, nearly 400 performers, everybody is supposed to be walking in, and there are security checks. Very high, very intense security checks which are being made. People walking in, performers are there, they're getting ready. Let me first ask, are you all volunteers or are you all part of the performing troupe?
Volunteers.
Volunteers.
Volunteers, yeah.
How excited are you?
We are just waiting for it. We're waiting for it. It's like a wedding here. It's exactly the same.
Absolutely.
We are feeling as if the wedding is happening in our house. It's that feeling we have.
Yeah, it's the same chaos and everybody's running
Yeah.
around here.
Yes. It's at a higher level, but it's very exciting.
Exactly.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
How long have you all been working on this?
Oh, it's been months, I think.
Several months.
Several
Lots
months.
of
Yes.
lots
Yeah.
of different groups, lots of different volunteers, all of our community organizations.
How many performers are there on stage?
There's 25 groups, I believe, that are performing.
25 groups. And
yeah.
Overall about 400.
Over about,
More
I think
than
about
that.
600 individuals.
More than that, I think
More than
600.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
600 performers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bright and early start for all. Aren't you all tired doing this?
No, we are actually more energetic today.
More
Yeah.
energetic.
Yeah, we
all
have more
worth it.
energy than any day, actually.
Modi ji's in Sydney, so that energy is already.
They've rolled out the red carpet for him, the Indian diaspora here in Australia. I have not moved from this place since morning because this is now a high security zone. But I know what all has happened for the Prime Minister. There's a bike rally that's been undertaken by 40 or 50 bike and car riders taking Prime Minister Narendra Modi's name all across. There was a person who climbed the Sydney Harbour Bridge this morning to time his climb right at the top of the bridge while the Modi Airways flies over from Melbourne. That's a chartered flight which more than 174 members of the Indian diaspora here in Australia have chartered and flown from Melbourne to Sydney to be a part of this event. And of course the crowd entrails which have happened, which have said welcome Narendra Modi. That has happened. There are buses that have flown, that have been plied from Brisbane, from Adelaide, all making a beeline for Sydney. There's a Modi Airways or a flight that's also coming from Perth, which has brought in more of the Indian diaspora. So pan-Australia, there have been people who have come here and everybody has tried to do something different for Prime Minister Narendra Modi to try and make it memorable, make it interesting. What's happening inside the Kudos Bank Arena? In the morning, I showed you the tech rehearsals. Well, now look at this. These are the performances live that are happening. They're being streamed on the Oz Welcomes Modi live stream on YouTube. They're being telecast. It's a multi-cam telecast which is happening. There are local broadcasters who are taking into the feed. But more importantly, what we are seeing is different flavors of India. They are all ladies, students, girls, young girls, not professionals. They're not professionals. There were 300 groups that auditioned. Out of the 300 groups, about 25 of them have been selected, nearly 600 performers, and I'll tell you, they have really sweated hard. They've really put in their effort because they want to leave a lasting impression for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It's still about an hour and a half before he comes down. He should be here by about 1 p.m. India time, 1:30 India time. So we've got about 2 hours before he comes. But the activities start around 5:30 p.m. Sydney time. So you can backtrack it till about 1 p.m. India time. That's where I think it will start picking up. The energy will start picking up. With these performances, slowly the energy is also going up. If you look at the Kotus Bank Arena, we should have already about 5,000 to 7,000 people seated. The rest are outside because there is huge dhamal that is happening outside. There is dhol, there is tashe, there is... It's like a festival. This is happening. Like some of the volunteers said, it's like a great big wedding. If you invite 20,000 people to a wedding, what happens? That's the kind of chaos and confusion, celebration that we're seeing outside. But there are also security measures because you've got the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, coming in, federal MPs, and they're all making a special effort. We must understand this and we should appreciate the Australian government for this because Parliament session is on. And despite that, MPs cutting across the aisle are making an effort to come down, make that 3.5-hour journey from Canberra to Sydney to be a part of this event later in the evening. So Parliament finishes in about 2 to 2:30. They will all be making their way so that they can get here by about 5:36. And from about 5:30 to 8:30 or 6 to 8:30, that's when the majority of the performances are. Now this performance this is the Odia group. If you remember, I caught them, doing it, practicing in the shadows, this Ditang Ditang Baje. And I remember the song, and that's how I got the cue that they are the ones who are performing. Now, they're all working professionals, these ladies. Working professionals, some of them teachers, some of them researchers, some of them working with IT companies. They have taken time out to come out and put out this performance. So that takes effort. And this is a weekday. So they've taken 2 days off and practiced on the weekends for the last 1.5 to 2 months to put together this performance here. So I was speaking to all of them, and all of them have put this effort in. That's what counts. The Indian diaspora who made Australia their home, a lot of them born here, are still connected to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And via Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they believe they're connecting a little more to India. They're trying to once again find their roots again, rediscover their roots, if I may say that. And somewhere that connect is happening because of that one man, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And they say he came 9 years ago, 2014, and now just on the cusp of him completing 9 years in government on the 30th of May, he's back here in Sydney, and they're very thankful. This is a very elaborate affair, and a bird on the wall or a fly on the wall tells me that they've spent nearly $1.5 million Australian dollars in putting this together, and all of this fund has been raised via corporate help and donations by members of the Indian diaspora.
And now allow me to bring in a special guest on this afternoon, where Mr. Ashok Sajjaner, a former diplomat, is joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Sajjaner, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. An important day today, even as we talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi touching down in Australia, and we are seeing the kind of grand welcome that he's received. It's important to talk about how he is the sole Quad leader to have made it to that trip to Sydney, while others like the US President and also the Japanese PM pulling out.
Yes, you're right. The US President Joe Biden, he was to come here, and tomorrow it would have been the Quad Summit that would have taken place. But then, of course, he has domestic engagements, very serious engagements on escalation of the debt level. And so he had to cut short his visit from Hiroshima. He couldn't go to Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea and couldn't come to Australia, Sydney. And so the Quad Summit took place on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Hiroshima. And so the Japanese Prime Minister also decided to cut his visit, to cancel his visit to Australia. But I think it is in the fitness of things, and it is a measure of the very strong partnership and relationship between India and Australia that Prime Minister Modi decided to come to Australia. And he has a full program here. And of course, the outreach to the Indian diaspora, you would recall that when Prime Minister Modi had come here in November 2014, and then when he was addressing the Indian diaspora, he said that it has taken 28 years for an Indian Prime Minister to come to Australia. And he had promised that my next visit will definitely not take place after 28 years. So it is taking place much sooner than that. And of course, during this period, Australia has emerged as a very significant critical partner
Yes.
for India. And in a variety of ways, we had the Australian Prime Minister coming to India just 2 months ago. And then he should be visiting again. India again in September for the G20 summit. But I think this very regular exchange, the two leaders also met in Hiroshima. So this very regular exchange truly demonstrates the very strong partnership, not only as far as trade commerce is concerned, people to people, student community, but even in the strategic field, both are members of the Quad and are votaries of a free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific.
Right. Mr. Sajanan, that's an important point that you're making. Tomorrow, of course, is that big bilateral between Anthony Albanese and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The most important aspect that is going to be discussed is, of course, the defense bilateral, especially in the wake of the growing Chinese influence on the Indo-Pacific region. If you were to throw light on that aspect of things, where do you see the conversation between the two leaders going?
I think there will definitely be an attempt to enhance our bilateral partnership in the area of defense. Both of us, India and Australia, are participants in the Malabar exercise. These Malabar exercises this time are going to take place off the coast of Australia. So that is very significant. Both, as I mentioned, both India and Australia are very active members of the Quad. And you would recall that last year when the Quad summit took place in Tokyo in May, in fact, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's party had just then won the election. And he took the oath of office in the morning, and in the afternoon, he was in Tokyo to participate in the Quad summit. So this gives the viewers an idea of the importance that Australia also attaches to the Quad and to its strong security relations with India. Defense cooperation is definitely going to be a very integral part of the conversations that take place tomorrow, because China has emerged as a huge security threat. Of course, Australia is a part of what is known as AUKUS also, in addition to being a part of the Quad and free and open Indo-Pacific. It's also a part of AUKUS, but that, of course, is quite separate and removed from India, because that is a collaboration between Australia, UK, and US to produce nuclear submarines in Australia and make them ready for deployment in this region. But defense and maritime security, which is a very important element of the Quad deliberations, will definitely form a very significant component of the discussions that take place tomorrow between the two leaders.
Right. Mr. Sajjan, I was just also watching these live visuals that are playing out for our viewers constantly. Australian Prime Minister's just welcomed Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the stage. There's the launch of a region that's been named after Little India. That is a kind of impetus on the Indian diaspora that the Australian government is really putting to. Now that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is speaking, we can see the kind of rousing welcome that he has received. Of course, it's a huge Indian diaspora in Australia, and it speaks volumes of the popularity that Narendra Modi really commands in Australia. After 9 years, he's returning to the nation, and we can see how the crowd is cheering for him. How do you see this entire grand spectacle that we are seeing from Kudos Banks Arena for Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Yes, our outreach to our diaspora had started in 2001 when we started this whole exercise of the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas and so on and so forth. But I think the energy, enthusiasm, and the leadership that has been provided by Prime Minister Modi after 2014 has been truly exceptional and truly remarkable. It has not been done, I think, not only in India, nowhere else in the world. That's why you would recall that even in Hiroshima, the other leaders, for instance, President Joe Biden was telling Prime Minister Modi that you are so popular in
Yes.
the United States that I need to take your autograph. And Prime Minister Albanese was mentioning at that meeting that there is not enough space to accommodate all the people who are coming from all corners of the country and of the continent to Sydney to participate in this meeting. So he has become very popular, and this 9 years, wherever he has gone, even to the furthest of places, for instance, no one could imagine that one could put together a gathering like this, even in a country like Myanmar, and the capital of Myanmar in Naypyidaw. But there also it has been done, and he has filled Prime Minister Modi wherever he's gone, and also the other leaders, I should add, but of course led by Prime Minister Modi. He has given this sense of pride and enthusiasm to the Indian diaspora, that now they are proud of calling themselves Indian, and they have emerged as true ambassadors of India in whichever country they are residing in. Many of them might, of course, be residents and citizens of that country, but their emotional and spiritual connect with India, that has not come down in any way. In fact, that has got strengthened. And that is truly remarkable, because they are now acting as bridges
Yes.
of friendship and of connectivity between the different countries. And they are also contributing. For instance, we can see in the United States, when to take our relationship forward, to take our engagement and partnership forward, the diaspora, 4 million strong diaspora in the United States, it plays a very important role. And now, of course, they have started occupying important positions in the local administration. For instance, President Biden's White House and many other ministries and departments. Indian diaspora members are very prominent by their presence there.
Right. And so while we speak about that, Mr. Sajjanar, I'd like to, take one last point from you. While we're talking about the Indian diaspora, we have seen in the last year and also this first part of this year, we've seen ample attack on Hindu temples in Australia that has been done by Khalistan supporters. Do you think the kind of ice-breaking exercise that both the Indian and Australian Prime Ministers have already had, do you think that also is going to make it to the part of the bilateral talks? Is that going to feature in the conversation at all?
I think it definitely will. You would recall that when Prime Minister Albanese was visiting India, this was an issue that was raised with him by Prime Minister Modi, and he had given a commitment that I will make sure that these things don't go ahead, that these are curtailed and these are contained. And I'm sure that is going to be an issue of discussion between the two leaders. We know that the security and the welfare and the well-being of the Indian diaspora in different countries is a very important element of concern wherever Prime Minister Modi goes, whether he goes to the Middle East or to Europe or to US or elsewhere. So this will definitely be an issue of discussion. What I'm told is that the Australian government is trying its very best to deal with all these extremist and terrorist elements who are resorting, the Khalistanis there. They are getting support from different parts of the world, particularly ISI from Pakistan is funding many of these groups, whether it is in Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, Canada. So the sources, the money laundering that comes there, that needs to be curtailed. I think the Australian government is very serious about it. And very soon we will see, increasing crackdown on these elements so that they can be totally contained.
All right, Mr. Sajjanar, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for your inputs.